2023 was a great year for video games. Whether it was the release of brand new IPs, sequels expanding on the originals, or full-blown cultural phenomena, 2023 was one of the greatest years for video games in recent memory. And best of all, the year started off exceptionally strong. Tango Gameworks, creators of the Evil Within series, put out the first major contender for Game of the Year a month into 2023. Rhythm action is a difficult genre to create, since creating and crafting a world that moves to the rhythm is a massive challenge for all involved. There have been rhythm games released before, Guitar Hero, Rock Band, and DDR to name a few. But rhythm action, games that have you not just playing to the music, but the entire world itself, were few and far between. To Johanas, the director of The Evil Within 2, no game made thus far had captured the real feeling of fighting monsters and enemies to the music. Wishing to create the dream game he always wanted, the survival horror director pitched the idea of a rhythm-based action game to Tango Gameworks creator, Shinji Mikami, of Devil May Cry fame. While The Evil Within 2 was being put through the works in 2017, Tango Gameworks were busy creating their biggest gamble, yet simultaneously, their magnum opus. What most people know about Hi-Fi Rush is that the game was shadow dropped the day it was intended to release, but the journey to get to that release was an endeavor in and of itself. Hi-Fi Rush began its development after Johanas pitched the idea to Shinji Mikami immediately following The Evil Within 2's release. In the lead up to Ghostwire Tokyo's release, Mikami told the public that he hopefully wanted to shift the public's perception of his company a little bit. The studio had only released horror games up until that point, and he hoped that their next game would end up showing them that they can be more than just a horror studio. Apparently, Johanas was extremely worried about the initial pitch to Mikami, since they had just come off of not only The Evil Within 2, but also Evil Within 1, all of the DLCs, and Ghostwire Tokyo had been announced as Tango's next major release. Adding on top of that was the fact that they were owned by Bethesda, and Bethesda's wheelhouse was not familiar with rhythm action. It even got to the point where the Bethesda producer at Tango Gameworks was saying to Johanas, quote, "Yeah, this is a long shot." So, the pressure was on for Johanas to deliver after Mikami gave him the go-ahead to make a prototype. The then-titled Project Hibiki was only headed up by two people in the beginning, Johanas himself, and Ruriko Nakamura, a single programmer. And I apologize if I mispronounced her name. Johanas had one idea in mind in the beginning: make a level set to the rhythm. After pitching it to Mikami, Johanas and Nakamura worked on this one little segment of a level, having an unnamed Chai move to the rhythm along with the enemies and the level itself, using simple platforms to move to the beat. Johanas wanted the game to be unlike any other rhythm action game before. When developing this gray box level, he was thinking of other rhythm action games before, like Crypt of the Necrodancer. To him, those games never felt like how he wanted rhythm action to work. He believed that it didn't feel right. If you didn't play correctly on the beat, you would get punished or would outright die. He didn't want that for his game. He believed it like this: when playing a rhythm game or a rhythm action game, the button press is the rhythm activation. And while Johanas says that's correct, from a satisfaction feeling while fighting per se, it's normally where the hit is on the beat. As such, Project Hibiki's first gameplay mechanic was created during this gray box process, and that was the idea of the beat hit. After working for a decent amount of time on this hypothetical arena and level design, the art design then came next, being layered on top of this level the two created. I'll discuss the art design shortly, but as time progressed, things continued to layer on top of other mechanics and ideas during the development. Early programming milestones were set in stone early on. Due to the focus on rhythm, the game needed to be a hard-locked 60 FPS, and they wanted the game to be more of an accessible title compared to other rhythm action games like Crypt of the Necrodancer, so that if you weren't familiar with playing to the music, it would still be satisfying and playable, which led to the game rewarding you for attacking on the beat as opposed to punishing you. Despite those early milestones, the funny thing was that internally, the music team and other people familiar with rhythm action were pointing out that the game was too easy. Johanas countered by telling them that it's intentional, as he wanted the game to be more accessible above most other things, so new players to the genre wouldn't feel intimidated. Every new member that was brought onto Johannes' team through Project Hibiki weren't separated to do individual tasks. Everyone was tightly knit together, fully aware of what others were building at the same time, so that no one was on a different page, making everyone in sync with each other. Johannes and the art team took an interesting amount of inspiration when it came to the world and design itself. While many comparisons and inspirations were brought forth from Jet Set Radio, Beautiful Joe, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and even Into the Spider-Verse, the biggest inspiration actually came from a scene from Shaun of the Dead, specifically the bar fight scene set to Don't Stop Me Now.
And I was like, this is the vibe we want to go for. It has this kind of like quick, snappy dialogue, this sort of kinetic action and cuts and things like that. So the pace is very high, if that's correct. And that was kind of the goal right from the beginning. And so anytime someone joined the team, I was like, watch these movies. And it was just like, it was finished. I was like,
And funnily enough, the people at Tango weren't fully convinced a style of game like Hi-Fi Rush would actually work for as long as it does. Then Baby Driver came out.
It's funny because, this is pre-Baby Driver, and then once Baby Driver came out, because people were like, hey, it works in that scene, but can it work for the whole thing?
Right.
And then that movie came out, and I was like, it could work for a whole thing.
That is that movie.
So it's like...
According to Johannes himself, the level design was all graybox by him, and also created the UI and environment design before the other employees and programmers brought onto the project went and polished everything up. And soon enough, the prototype was sent around Bethesda through word of mouth, and the higher-ups over there were very invested in Johannes' new pet project. When Johannes and Tango all went to Bethesda to pitch the idea of Hi-Fi Rush, Bethesda had obviously already heard about the internal demo, and were fully aware of the positive reception internally that the game had achieved. So when the pitch actually took place, it was pretty much an easy slam dunk for Johannes and Tango. Despite the positive feedback from Bethesda and internally, certain developers on the project were admitting, albeit quietly, that they believed that the project would fail. While no particular reasons were given, they just weren't entirely confident in what Johannes had pitched, due to a variety of factors. Not helped by Johannes' own fear of his own dream project. Johannes opened up about how he was completely terrified the project of his dreams wouldn't even see the light of day. In his own words, unless the game itself was on the shelf, then there's no guarantee. The Shadow Drop aided in that fear, since many members of the team were unsure if it would come out as a result of the marketing team, which I'll discuss shortly. However, despite the ups and downs and the cautious optimism, everyone in the team was eventually able to mostly get over this fear, and internally the team was stronger than ever. From here on, I wasn't able to find much to discuss, so we might as well get all of the cut content and references out of the way before bringing up the game's release. First and foremost, the licensed music. The first boss of Hi-Fi Rush, QA1mil, has his fight set to Nine Inch Nails' 1 Million from the album The Slip. Funnily enough, despite not knowing if he'd get the license to it, Johannes actually grayboxed the first boss fight and set the fight to the instrumental version of that exact song.
we actually prototyped the first boss, which was like a gray box version of what actually is the first boss in the game, and we didn't know if we would get the license to it or anything, but we actually did use the same song, the
Nine Inch Nails song.
For that.
Wow.
You know, we didn't plan on releasing it, obviously, but when that album came out, Nine Inch Nails, The Slip, they released that album with the stems for the instrumentals for all of the songs.
Interesting.
And that came out when I was in college, and I remember Trent Reznor was like, he came out and he was like, hey, use the stems, remix it, use GarageBand. I think GarageBand was like kind of like the go-to for like just kind of casual like remixing.
Yeah.
He was like, make these cool remixes and just put them out live. This is like, do what you want with it. And I wasn't very skilled with that type of stuff. And so I always held on to these stems. I'm like, one day I want to do something with this. and then I'm like, let's show that we can do, because originally the plan was we wanted this licensed music to sort of have these like climax moments, like these boss fights, but we didn't want to be a big game about licensed music. So it's like, we have this song, it hits our BPM target, the song's great, it fits, let's try doing this. And wrote up this, that was kind of like the second prototype for like how we would use licensed music in the game, and we showed that off. And like half of us were afraid because of like, if we don't get the license to the song, we're gonna have to redo this entire thing.
Totally.
But luckily we were able to actually get the license to that song, and they actually even gave us better versions of those stems to use, which was great.
Chai, peppermint, macaron, cinnamon, Corsica, and pretty much all of the game's characters, now that I think about it, were originally placeholder names, acting as jokes, almost. Johannas' design document had the characters written out with their names as placeholders for the time being, simply wanting the characters' names to be fun, not stereotyped as a Western name or a Japanese name or what have you. He simply wrote down food items or spices and used them as their names, but eventually as time went on, the others on the project got used to calling them by their names, so they stuck. The game's Xenogears reference in Mission 10 was actually a means to disguise a cut level. Originally, you were going to fight through production and make your way onto that landing pad that starts Mission 10, but it was cut, which is why Chai and the others try to gloss over it as best they can, even breaking the fourth wall. While we're on the topic of cut levels, we know that not only one level was cut, but it's possible that 3 bosses were cut as well. There's the obvious robot in Mission 7 that Cinnamon blatantly points out, but also the giant Zanzo robot in Mission 4. Same goes for that cut level 2, as it was originally going to have a boss at the end of it. Additionally, there was supposedly going to be an HR department boss, but they were cut from the game and replaced with the detectives you can find around the levels. The dev room added in the arcade update didn't add much in the way of cut content, only really adding a concept art wall, which showed players early concept drafts of levels and character designs. However, as Johannes continued to mention in interviews, there was very little that was scrapped, and not much seemed to have changed from his original vision. The levels themselves were remarkably similar to the final product, with only a handful of changes. And after looking at these art pieces, I do believe him. There weren't even that many major leaks, only ones coming months prior to the release window. People managed to find the logo being filed for a trademark, and a hypothetical concept art for the game. People speculated that this futuristic shooter was Hi-Fi Rush at the time, with its futuristic designs for the characters and environment design. But there's little discussion on it now, and it was all speculation. It might have been a scrapped game at Tango, maybe a future IP, or maybe it's nothing at all and we're overthinking this. Moving on to the initial release, Hi-Fi Rush was intended to be announced in March of 2020. If any of you remember, March of 2020 was right around the time that a certain virus affected the world, and in particular, hit the United States. A teaser trailer was initially going to be shown, but the marketing and PR team at Bethesda, not Tango, pushed back on it. As time continued, the ideas kept shifting around. The announcement kept getting pushed back and back and back, and once Bethesda, and subsequently Tango, were acquired by Microsoft and put on Game Pass, the announcement window kept getting pushed back even further until 2023. With nervous confidence in the product, and the belief that players will want to immediately play what they see in the Xbox showcase, the marketing departments decided on releasing the game first, and advertise it after the fact. And that's exactly what happened on January 25th. 2023. Devil May Cry 5 is one of my favorite games of all time. Not just because it checks off all those boxes I want from a game, enjoyable characters, good visuals, entertaining story, etc., but because its combat is a perfect amalgamation for what I look for in video games. There are 4 quintessential things that make a stylish action game what it is: character movesets, enemies, bosses, and level design. Most DMC games have this in spades. DMC 1 has level design as its best quality, followed by bosses, then enemies, and finally movesets. DMC 3 and 4 have movesets, then level design, then bosses, and then enemies. DMC 5 has its specialties laid out exactly as I like it. Character movesets, then enjoyable enemies, then excellent bosses, then level design. DMC 5's movesets are varied and satisfying to play as, each giving a unique type of playstyle despite similar moves between each playable character. Its enemies offer the least amount of headaches compared to other games in the franchise, and while there are some annoying enemies here and there, it's still fun to engage with them. The bosses it provides are some of the best boss fights I've encountered in gaming history, and its level design, while being uninspired and non-existent in the second half, still provides good arenas to fight in without the need for gimmicks to keep battles interesting. My preference for stylish action games is to focus on the quintessential moment-to-moment gameplay, and it's why DMC 5's combat shines so brightly compared to the other games in the series, a feat that Hi-Fi Rush understands and exhibits. While I doubt Hi-Fi Rush actually took cues from DMC 5 as its influence, seeing as DMC 5 hadn't been released at the time of Hi-Fi Rush's earliest days, I mainly use it as a reference point to show what Hi-Fi Rush succeeds at. Chai's moveset begins quite limited as per you'd expect. Only 9 combos to work with, a dash that can be chained, a double jump, and 1 special attack tied to a separate resource. Once Chai joins up with Peppermint, however, his potential skyrockets. Each combo in Chai's arsenal fulfills a particular purpose for his journey. Echo Splash is good for moving Chai forward as well as bringing enemies into the air. Stomp Box is an excellent crowd control option and deals a deceptive amount of damage. Arpeggio Stab is great for lifting enemies in the air and being excellent for getting your hit counter up. Ignoring the partner attacks and jam combos for a moment, Chai's move list is overall a wholly complete set that makes Chai unique and fun to play. He's different compared to what I'm used to, and I'm a fan of it. Hi-Fi Rush as a whole is more focused around high hit counts, multipliers, and score over keeping a high style ranking, as evidenced by how easy it is to keep the rhythm meter at S. It's more about getting a high score, almost like a pick-up-and-play arcade game. And this is only shown further when we include the partner attacks, jam combos, and parry counters. Peppermint, Macaron, and Corsica all have their own unique quirks about them that make each useful in certain situations. Peppermint seems to be more focused around high hit counts, Macaron is more focused around dealing lots of damage, and Corsica is similar to Peppermint in her purpose, just substitute damage for the ability to increase stun gauges faster. Much like Chai's moveset, each summon fulfills a purpose and are all welcome additions. For now. Special attacks add a unique flavor to Chai's repertoire, with most of them giving you that extra edge you need to turn the tides, and spices up the gameplay much like the jam combos do. Everything from an on-command health increase to an arena clearing spin attack. Each player has their own preferences for their own special attack, and it's excellent that none of them are mediocre and have their uses. Well, except a few, but we'll get to that. Lastly are the chips, each providing passive bonuses that can be switched in and out as you see fit. Chai's diversity greatly expands thanks to this system, and is used to make some pretty interesting builds. You can purely focus on an overall build for the game, focusing on just Chai, or you can build into your friends. Maybe give Peppermint some AoE capabilities to make her a complete stun-locking champion. Make Macaron's punches infinitely better by giving them more range and damage. Allow Corsica to have near infinite stun uptime so you're never struggling to get those stun gauges down. The chips do add a lot to the game's replay value, even if it takes a while before you can really mess around with them. Combine everything I've just listed with the standard upgrades you find in a stylish action game, such as permanent health increases, reverb upgrades, and health tanks restoring you after death, and you've got a recipe for a great combat system and an enjoyable character in Chai. But that's only 1/4 of the gameplay on offer, as now there's the discussion of enemies. All games have annoying enemies in one way or another, but stylish action games usually get the short end of the stick. Every DMC game has had its frustrating enemies to fight in one way or another. The Furies in DMC 5, half the enemies in DMC 3, or the Chimeras in DMC 4. None of these games have been perfect about it, but Hi-Fi Rush comes the closest to hitting that perfect mark. Hi-Fi Rush's assortment of enemies to fight are never frustrating to engage with, and each of them provide a challenge, even the first enemies you fight, like the Sabers and Gunners. Enemies are color-coded to signify who needs to deal with them. The general rule of thumb is that yellow or orange enemies means that they're neutral, meaning Chai can take them down without the help of Peppermint or the others. Blue means they have barriers, and Peppermint is required to take down the shields. Green means that the enemy has Z-shielding, and Macro needs to punch them to soften them up. And most of the time, red means that fires are involved, and Corsica needs to fan out the flames. While there is some tech players can eventually learn to take out barriers without needing Peppermint, this general rule is standard. Even with this piece of tech, none of the enemies overstay their welcome, and none of them are frustrating to fight, even 160 hours later. Even the most annoying enemies, being the Vultures, Bombers, Centaur, and any enemy with Z-shielding, aren't as bad compared to some of the enemies in other stylish action games. With a higher level of skill, these enemies merely become speed bumps, as opposed to walls on the first playthrough. But regardless of the difficulty of each of these enemies, all of them are fun to combo, parry, dodge, and encounter. The ultimate goal of making an enjoyable and accessible combat system was succeeded. Then there's the boss fights. Similar to the enemies, each boss provides a different level of challenge depending on the situation and the player playing. There's only 6 bosses, so I feel comfortable quickly rapid firing through them and explaining why most of them are so great. You would think that QA1 Mill, being the first boss, would be arguably the worst. He's the tutorial boss, you'd think. But no. QA is one of my favorites, despite being overall quite simple. He has multiple hitboxes, which is a plus in and of itself. He's got unique mechanics in the form of punching his face armor off to reveal another hitbox, one that deals extra damage. His mechanics are easy to understand, yet still slightly dangerous on repeat runs, and has one of the best opening cutscenes in the game, which I'll cover in the story section. Rekka, by contrast, is sadly a step down. Despite having a good first impression and multiple levels building up her personality and her stereotype, the fight itself just doesn't leave enough of an impression. And it isn't helped that Rekka is one of the few bosses that have glaring flaws. Like the dreaded Phase 2 Curse, where the second phase of the boss fight just isn't fun or engaging, her attacks have long windups that make them easy to dodge or in repeat runs parry, or her glaring weakness to being juggled in the air and stun-locked. This is on Rhythm Master difficulty, but thankfully, following that display of mediocrity, Corsica picks up the slack by being the best boss in the game hands down. I'm not going to say anything about Corsica's fight, since I'm going to dedicate an entire segment to this fight in the story section, but just know this boss is arguably the peak of the entire game. Mimosa's fight sadly brings things back down. If we were judging on a fun scale, Mimosa would be at the bottom. It's not because I'm bad at this fight, I can still easily beat her on Rhythm Master without failing. The issue is that much of her kit doesn't feel fun to fight against. Her shield isn't fun to deal with unless you abuse your partner attacks. Her attack window when she's stunned is too short, not allowing you to get any level of satisfying damage in. Her attacks are either pathetically easy to deal with or just you can straight up ignore them. She's got the Phase 2 Curse, and her character just isn't engaging. She's not there enough during the game to get a lock on her. I still believe this fight is the worst in the game, and anyone who argues with me will see the reason eventually because I am stubborn. And Roqueford's fight is odd. We have enough of a character to build on, his fight has a grand spectacle, but the actual mechanics we're left with just make it disappointing. His actual attacks are just as telegraphed as Rekka, and arguably easier to parry. He's more threatening since he has a wider variety of attacks in my eyes, but you can deal with all of them quite easily. He's strong as hell, just as, if not more strong than Kale, but it doesn't mean much if you can just easily avoid all the damage. There's a lot more nuances to this fight that I'm not going to get into here because I'd bloat out the video even longer. Thankfully though, Kale finishes the game strong as a worthy contender for the final boss. If Corsica didn't exist, he'd probably be the best, judging on everything he does. He's the challenge regardless of your skill level. He's got a wide variety of attacks and strategies, excellent narrative focus, and acts as a true final challenge. Lastly though, there's one more thing I'd like to discuss, as these bosses, enemies, and arenas can't be brought up if they aren't supported by good level design. On the Hi-Fi Rush scale, missions 1 and 2 are pretty average, with basic visuals, simple platforming, and almost 2 types of enemies, only bringing in the elite enemies to spice things up from time to time. Missions 3 and 4 pick things up with the introduction of many different enemy types, more complex platforming, secrets, and arenas, 2 distinct environments to traverse, and gorgeous visuals. Missions 5, 6, and even 7 to a degree slow things down once again, with the pacing suffering as a result. Spending a total of 3 levels in Corsica's section does bring the pacing down from a narrative standpoint, especially since we're basically doing busy work for missions 5 and 6. Despite this, Mission 7 is my favorite mission in the game, as I believe it has the best balance of exploration and engaging combat encounters, and finishes off with the best boss fight. But looking from a perspective of pacing, all 3 of these missions are a bit of a letdown. Mission 8 brings things back to missions 3, 4, and 7 in regards to quality, having outstanding visuals, a good mix of exploration and combat, and has a strong narrative presence. And lastly, missions 10 and 11 conclude with some of the best level design, sequences, and pacing in the game. Hi-Fi Rush is overall a net positive in the gameplay department, but even then, none of these individual components will blow you away. Despite having an overall level of quality that few games ever hope to achieve, there are some minor and major issues with each of these pillars that cause the foundation to be shaken. Not damaged or broken, just shaken. However, I must preface something. All of the issues I'm about to discuss are only really highlighted if you decide to do at least 2 to 3 playthroughs. If you simply play through Hi-Fi Rush once, and maybe replay to get the collectibles and the secret ending, then it's likely that a majority of the problems I'm about to get into don't really affect you. These issues were only put under a spotlight as a result of my previous background in the genre, and the over 160 hours I put into Hi-Fi Rush over the course of the last year. Starting off with combat, the biggest issue with Chai's moveset is that there simply aren't enough moves at his disposal. After you purchase all of Chai's combos, you quickly realize that there's a great set of moves to use, a good set of moves to use, and then there's ones that are just okay or outright unsafe. And with how the game was designed, it's slightly disappointing that much of the moveset feels limited. Combos like Breakdown and Harmonic Beam are top tier, while moves like Compressor Slam, Shred, and Gain Tornado are going to be too unsafe to use unless you're confident enough to think you can get away with it. Plus, there's also not a lot of options in the air. Air combos are way too free in this game, and they make you really safe, to the point that it's kind of sad. Special attacks are also quite uninteresting from a choice perspective. Most of the good ones you'll learn pretty quickly, and the bad ones are quite obvious. Why use something like Rip and Tear, Barrier Wall, Hollow Chai, or Steal the Show when you have access to Hibiki, Overdrive Slash, Double Riff, Twin Assault, or even the decent ones like Power Chord, Air Guitar, Pick Slide, or Pick Me Up? There's an inequality in many of these for me, and for once I feel like regardless of playstyle, players are going to gravitate towards certain ones more so than others. You feel like you've reached the skill ceiling by the end of the game, but unlike DMC or Bayonetta, there's not much else to learn after you beat it. DMC has jump canceling tech, character tech to learn like teleport canceling, enemies to understand, or Dante's entire kit to figure out. By mission 12, you pretty much already know everything you need to know. It's just a matter of putting it into practice. Chai is begging for more move variety, as the way he is now makes him slightly stale after a certain point. By this point, either making the other characters playable or adding more tech or combos into the game to open up the combat is the only way to fix this problem in my eyes. The partner attacks, for as fun as they can be, do provide this bad habit. You've most likely noticed when looking at my gameplay, but when in combat, you'll often think to just spam all 3 of them at once when they're off cooldown, and there's really no risk to doing that in most situations. Once you get Corsica more than halfway through the game, cycling through all 3 of your summons is enough to stun lock most enemies before they can even do anything. And I don't want other stylish action games to take cues from Hi-Fi Rush's design. Namely, I'm not a fan of the idea of using summons on a cooldown to deal with enemies. It's less reliant on your own skill with combos and more on something that's somewhat out of your control. I'd vastly prefer multiple playable characters over this system. Though, while I'm trashing on the summons, of the 3, Macaron is easily the weakest. While his double bass drop jam combo and love tap counter are very good, arguably the best in the game, the other half of his kit isn't as useful. High strung, despite doing decent damage, isn't exactly the greatest of options available to you. His base punch is pretty terrible unless you're right up on an enemy or you invest in his chips to make him way better, and Gravity Well has my vote for the worst move in the game full stop, to the point that it was hard for me to get footage of this thing because it's that useless. Oh, and for how middle of the road he is, he's also got the longest base cooldown of the trio. Why? Moving on to enemies, while there aren't any truly glaring issues I have with the enemies, the ones I highlighted earlier I do want to bring up again. All of the enemies I mentioned during that earlier segment of the video commit a cardinal sin as far as I'm concerned, and that's breaking the flow of combat. The big reason why the bad enemies in the other DMC titles or the Bayonetta games are frustrating is because they break the standard flow of combat. They often force you into a defensive position or cause you to divert your attention instead of actively engaging with the combat and showing off your skills. Hi-Fi Rush's examples don't cause this to happen nearly as often, as each of these enemies can still be comboed with relative ease, but the fact that these problems still happen show me that there's still some room for improvement. Then there's the boss fights. While I won't be looking at every single thing that was done right and wrong, I do want to point out one thing in particular. The thing I called the Phase 2 curse. Every boss in the game has it to a varying degree. QA's Phase 2 doesn't change up enough from Phase 1 or even Phase 3 to really make it stand out. Sure, he shoots missiles, but he only sometimes does it, meaning it's not really a huge deal. Rekka's Phase 2 makes you completely unable to interact with her, save for using your partner attacks or barely hitting her with your ranged beat hits. Meaning you have to pretty much play passively and not do anything other than run away from her, which is another sin as far as I'm concerned, making your action game passive. Corsica introducing dodges into her parry sequences doesn't feel like enough of a mix-up to really make the second part of that fight feel unique either. Though, to be fair, there's not much you can really add to a parry sequence fight. Mimosa's Phase 2 is, well, if you follow my social media, you'll know how I feel about this part of the fight, but to speak on it a final time, turning the lights off and having an attack that you can literally not do anything to avoid is not a good look for your fight. And when you do engage with it, you can destroy her so easily it's not even funny. Roquefort's end of Phase 1 and Phase 2 don't do enough to differentiate each other, and the new attacks added in Phase 2 are the only real mechanical thing added. Yes, there's this laser grid, but it's not enough for me. If anything, it's a step down. And lastly, Kale's Phase 2, or Phase 3, depending on how you view the AU8 section, is another part where the pacing just slows to a crawl and you need to wait for him to initiate. Once again, you're waiting on the AI to let you play, which is a failure to me. And his arms can be destroyed quite effortlessly on all difficulty levels, making this feel more like a gimmick than a proper fight. So, with all my complaining out of the way, does Hi-Fi Rush still provide a good gameplay loop? And the answer is an overwhelming yes. There's little wrong with Hi-Fi Rush's gameplay, to the point that nearly all of my issues with the game are me nitpicking aspects of the design that honestly aren't that bad in the slightest. I could have discussed how the soft lock-on is occasionally annoying, how the parry is one of the most overpowered parries I've ever played in a game, or further dissected the special attacks after Hibiki and Overdrive Slasher are unlocked and pretty much make it a non-pick. But again, all of these are nitpicks. The tiniest of blemishes on an otherwise excellent combat system. Tango Gameworks succeeded in their goal, making you feel like you were playing through an interactive music video. The act of moving to the beat, attacking on the rhythm, chaining dodges, parries, special attacks, and partner attacks together in wonderfully realized environments with excellent music set Hi-Fi Rush apart from its competition in gameplay. So that raises the question, What about the story then? In preparation for this video, I played No Straight Roads for the first time, to see how Metronomic handled their take on the genre. After finishing it, I came to a conclusion that most others did. The game sucked. Playing it was horrible. But the world, the appreciation for music, and its themes about fan expectations were great, if a bit heavy-handed. No Straight Roads had a central message to give players in its characters, theming, and world that was brought down by everything else around it. No Straight Roads is about celebrating music and all it brings to people. Hi-Fi Rush is not nearly as sophisticated as Metronomic's debut project. The journey of Chai and his friends is laser-focused on pointing out the flaws in corporations and their machinations. The presentation does help mask this objective flaw. The world of Hi-Fi Rush is absolutely stunning, its various influences coming together to make one of the most beautiful worlds in recent memory. Its combination of cel shading and comic book influences make the visuals pop out in a way that few other games show. The way that every part of the environment moves to the rhythm makes the world itself feel alive and lived in. The narrative is a straightforward one. As said earlier, this isn't a sophisticated story. It's about a wannabe random guy stumbling into a corporate conspiracy and taking down the heads of the company one by one. The unique presentation makes the story engaging, and the subtle layers in said presentation raise Hi-Fi Rush from the mediocre stories often found in other games. Seeing as the game doesn't take itself seriously, you might think that it weakens the overall narrative, but it doesn't. Everything in this game, from the dialogue to the cutscenes to the little animations, carry with them a ton of charm and personality. It might sound nonsensical, possibly even a cop-out, especially since with how often I criticize tonal dissonance in games, where the players are often disconnected from the events and characters because of said tone. But Hi-Fi Rush balances both on a tightrope, and while it leans more towards the fun, happy-go-lucky side of things, it was never enough to frustrate me. The references to shows, games, movies, and probably dozens of other things I missed let you smile with glee without robbing the story of its major moments. But the greatest aspect of Hi-Fi Rush's presentation is, as expected, the score. Shuichi Kobori of Metal Gear Solid fame, Ryo Uratani of Monster Hunter, and Tango Gameworks regular Masatoshi Yanagi all combined their talents on the soundtrack to provide an immersive and energetic experience. The pressure was on for these composers to create a compelling set of music that not only pleased the ears, but was in service to the gameplay. They didn't disappoint. None of the songs are bad, and none of them feel out of place, using multi-layered tracks that build as the stage goes on, allowing the mood to be perfectly set for both exploration and combat. music is used not only to amplify its amazing moments, but also be used as a tone setter. Combined with excellent cinematography and well-directed cutscenes, it makes for an engaging narrative. QA's boss beginning with the rising platform, followed by Nine Inch Nails' 1 Million, with Chai's MP3 player signifying his and the player's heartbeat, is a perfect example of all these things working together. The over-the-top fun nature extends to the characters as well. Chai and his friends are all engaging, with their own individual quirks, and they all fall into stereotypes. Chai's the
slacker who's finally got his time to shine?
Peppermint's the
loner hacker girl with a mysterious past.
Macaron's the gentle giant. Cinnamon's the slightly deadpanned comic relief. And Corsica's the no-nonsense defector. Much like the story, none of the characters are going to show you anything new. But that's okay. It's not trying to push narratives forward. It's simply about being fun. What was surprising was seeing each character develop over the course of the story. Chai obviously had the most room to grow, seeing as he was the protagonist, but seeing Peppermint move on from using people and instead seeing them as genuine allies was nice. Watching Macaron go from gentle and scared of conflict to being more confident by the end was a great thing to see too. Cinnamon's growing desire to help the party and having it play off in the penultimate level was fantastic. And seeing Corsica ease up around the others and in general was refreshing. The villains share these traits too. Each head of Vandalay is distinct in their own personality and identity from their designs, speech pattern, mannerisms, and arguably their boss fights too. They almost feel like they were ripped from Borderlands with how over-the-top and extravagant most of them are in appearance and dialogue. Macho Woman Rekka Savage is a wrestling stereotype, speaking in the third person all the time. Mimosa's a narcissistic pop star, only focused on her image. Ropefort's this old man who also happens to transform into a werewolf. Each boss provides a level of satisfaction, be it from their speeches, making you laugh, or their actions, making you disgusted by them in some way. Which brings us to Kale. Kale's entire design is probably the best in the game. Everything from his outfit to his motivations to his entire purpose is in complete contrast to Chai. Kale's a slacker in every sense of the word. He rose the ranks of the company by manipulation and backstabbing. His grand plan involves mind-controlling customers so he doesn't need to put the work in to be recognized and successful. He feels important since he's the head of the company and dresses the part, yet acts like the most childish and spoiled brat whenever his plans go awry. He can't even do simple shit right.
If it comes to that, I'll take care of it. Now, might I suggest pushing plans forward?
After I get a coffee.
We shut down the cafe.
When I said close the campus down, I didn't mean the cafe!
You said close down everything.
But not coffee, Roquefort, not coffee. You always need coffee for things like this. Open the cafe.
His coworkers constantly question him.
Shall I take them in, sir?
Yes, of course I want you to take them in. Why else would I bring you?
And even his super secret backup plan has the saddest ending ever.
And now, the cogs of my master plan are in motion as I prepare.
A clean floor is a healthy floor.
Chai's similar in the beginning. He's absent-minded, not caring about anything other than becoming a world-famous rock star. He cuts corners, finds shortcuts, and does anything he can to get ahead. But through working with Peppermint and the others, Chai slowly molds himself into the leader he's meant to be, culminating in two of the best moments in the game, Corsica's boss and Reflection. Throughout Corsica's parry battle, Chai shows every aspect of his character. His failure as a diplomat, his happy-go-lucky nature, yet simultaneously showing glimpses of a genuinely good person deep down. The whole boss is this excellent set of dialogue where Chai's trying to understand Corsica more than wear her down. Once Phase 2 wraps up, though, we get this.
I worked hard for this job. I won't just give it up.
What are you doing this for? Kale?
What does it matter?
He doesn't care about you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept you in the dark.
You don't know that.
I know you're not like the others, Corsica. You can feel something's wrong.
Chai, you are surprisingly convincing.
De-escalating.
Then Chai
Think we
screws it
may
up.
have a chance.
Or are you just too oblivious to figure that out?
And the music kicks in.
That's it. Now I'm mad.
Everything about this sequence in game design, audio, visuals, and storytelling is constructed to make this final phase as thrilling and exhilarating as possible. Hi-Fi Rush's basic mechanics are given such an expertly crafted section that the simplicity doesn't register in the moment. On paper, it's just like any other parry sequence in the game. But in execution, it's what makes Hi-Fi Rush special 1 year later. And while bringing up excellent gameplay and narrative moments, that brings us to the penultimate level, and negotiation. It's remarkable how much QuickTime events can still be used to engage and reinforce your connection to these characters, all wrapped around arguably the game's best track. It's these segments that raise Hi-Fi Rush's narrative above so many other games. The music, presentation, and gameplay all work together in tandem to bring the experience to new highs. Yet that same level of attention to detail wasn't put to penning the actual narrative. The writing was praised by many reviewers, and it's easy to see why. I'm actually in the same boat. It's snappy, quick-witted, and fun to listen to. The cast is all well acted, and there's no weak link in the characters. There might be a few duds in the jokes here and there, but they're the exception rather than the rule. However, Hi-Fi's biggest crime relates entirely to its major moments. While those uplifting moments in the story were and still are high points, the low are whenever the game tries to bring drama into the story. Tension between characters like Zanzo and Roquefort aren't effectively shown, other than to use as a punchline. Corsica and Mimosa's distaste for each other is briefly shown off and isn't expanded on at all. Even Kale's involvement feels like an afterthought when you consider how much of his underlings do his dirty work for him. This is the final boss and the head of the company, and while that's kind of the point, it's still somewhat sad to see him sit back and do so little throughout the game. Which also brings us to the twist. That's almost an insult to the term. Peppermint's twist that she's related to Kale and Roxanne isn't exactly something that came out of nowhere. The game is not subtle about it.
Hey, there's Kale! And that's, what's her name? The old Vandalay boss.
Roxanne Vandalay? Are you serious, Chai? She built the company from the ground up. Know your history.
Jeez, you wanting to yell?
Just give credit where it's due.
Maybe Roxanne founded the company, but Kale, cool dude, nice hair.
He's riding the coattails of a real pioneer.
What did he ever do to you?
Let's just focus on the mission.
At least the twist doesn't spark this end of Act 2 argument shit that crops up in even the best games of recent memory. The idea that Peppermint's secret would cause a rift in the group seems honestly hilarious to me, to the point that I wrote this entire paragraph for no reason other than to bitch about an otherwise inconsequential story moment. The same goes with Chai's development, and Corsica's defect to the good guys. Throughout the game, we see glimpses of Chai becoming less of an ass to those around him and using his annoying quirks to frustrate the heads of Vandalay instead of his friends. Namely Peppermint. But they're inconsistent. There's multiple moments where he shows his good side, acting caring to his friends, yet moments later immediately acting up and beginning to turn back to his old self. By Mission 8, when he's giving Peppermint that pep talk, it's slightly jarring to see him do that, since in the very same mission he'd been somewhat acting insensitive to Peppermint's obvious annoyance at her family history. And as for Corsica, the marketing tried its best to hide Corsica as much as they could, though not very effectively. And even then, anyone with a passing knowledge of visual design or storytelling will pick up on the subtle cues that she's just as much of an outcast as the rest of the group we're stuck with. From her lack of cybernetics prior to her joining the team, to her being left out of the loop of Kale's plan, to the dialogue that hints that she's kind of a fish out of water. So Corsica joining during Mission 7's conclusion wasn't exactly a major surprise. And that's kind of the frustrating part about this game. If you look at it critically and critique the narrative as if it were this grand sweeping epic, then you'd probably find many flaws with it. None of the characters will really change your life, none of the villains are truly despicable or complex, and none of the story or themes will really make you think super hard about things in the real world. It's all things you've seen before. However, that's okay. Not everything needs to be this massive philosophical exploration on the good and evil in the world. Sometimes it's okay to just sit down and be entertained by what's in front of you. And the prime example is Hi-Fi Rush. All of the criticism I laid at the story is completely inconsequential. I had to dig really hard and nitpick to find problems I have with it because the story isn't about being deep. The story isn't supposed to be thought-provoking. It's about being fun. Hi-Fi Rush feels like playing through a Saturday morning cartoon, and I mean that in the most positive way possible. Hi-Fi Rush delivers a great story with wonderful characters, villains, presentation, world building, and weaves story and gameplay together like few games can ever hope to achieve. It's entertaining, and at the end of the day, that's the most important thing that both the developers and games should aspire to be. Stylish action games pride themselves on being highly replayable. They have intentionally deep mechanics and high skill ceiling gameplay to push players to replay the same levels they've already gone through multiple times, to maximize their potential. Hi-Fi Rush boasts 5 playable difficulties, meaning 5 potential times to play through the game, learning new strategies. And Hi-Fi Rush continued this trend in the post-game with the Rhythm Tower, a Bloody Palace-style gauntlet of 60 floors of enemies, with each 10 floors separated by a boss. But in response to the lack of challenge and arguably post-game features in the game's launch, in July, Tango put out the Arcade Challenge update, adding 2 new game modes unlocked after completing the campaign, that aim to test the player's skills in new ways. Tower Up Power Up is the closest thing that Hi-Fi Rush got to resembling a roguelike, with the game depowering Chai and forcing you to slowly get his power back. But with every upgrade comes either a positive benefit or a negative one for that floor, making every wave feel fun and different. BPM Rush was Hi-Fi Rush's answer to Turbo Mode, increasing the speed by a massive amount, making everything play extremely fast, and leading to a chaotic game mode, which I'd argue is the most challenging game mode release, even more so than Rhythm Master. 2 new enemy types were added. Death Metal, a variant of the brutal enemies with his own unique gimmicks, attacks, and even a new parry sequence. The second enemy, which I just called the Shadow Clone Kimono, is in a similar vein to Death Metal, with his own mechanics that are similar to the kimono it's based on, with certain things to make him stand out. Namely, once again, his ability to make copies of himself to attack Chai and his parry sequence that's random every time you get it, making you always on your toes. Through fighting these enemies and going through these new game modes, the developers also added new achievements and goals to complete that give more outfits for Chai, 808 and Corsica, more photo options for the photo mode, new special attacks for Chai to mess around with, finally giving Cinnamon and Smidge their time to shine, and best of all, access to the super secret dev room with further commentary on the state of game development and heartfelt messages from the developers and the director himself. Having played over 100 hours by the time this update was released, the Arcade Challenge update was a worthy update back then. But 6 months later or so, is it still worth it? Yes and no. Specifically speaking about the game modes, they seem to have been made with the sole purpose of adding both content and difficulty to Hi-Fi Rush. And while the immediate satisfaction is there, in retrospect, it's not as fulfilling as I wish it could have been. Unlike the main missions, which let you soak in its greatest narrative moments while giving you excellent boss fights and dynamic levels, both of these new game modes regress. Tower Up Power Up's main gimmick falls apart mechanically once you realize that there's little reason to ever pick up the boosts that give positive bonuses. Not only are they generally weaker, the negative perks give you more bonuses while multiplying your overall score. The bonus rooms fall under the same criticism. There's no reason not to enter these, since the challenges are so easy and give such good rewards that you might as well just give the illusion of a choice here. While the new enemies provided in these 2 modes are welcome, as they each are far more deadly than any of the other enemies in the base game, they aren't enough to bring these floors above and beyond the main campaign. Plus, there isn't a lot to talk about regarding BPM Rush either, seeing as the only thing it does is increase the speed. That is what I wanted, and I am glad it's here, but that's all there is to say. Sure, Rhythm Tower is just a gauntlet of enemies, but you have the timer to keep track of. If it goes too low, not only do you lose, but that affects your final rank at the end. You actually sort of need to play differently compared to story mode in order to win in these fights. In the campaign, you needed to draw out fights, so you could combo enemies enough to get high score chains. Hitting 100 hits becomes the mark you need to get in order to hit S ranks. It's either that, or you instantly destroy your enemies with Overdrive Slash or Hibiki. In Rhythm Tower, it becomes a game of speed. You need to destroy enemies fast, else you're wasting valuable seconds needed to stay afloat. For the average player. Once you realize that certain exploits can be used to increase your time, you begin to shift your own style to fit what the game mode needs. Meanwhile, with BPM Rush, it's just nothing. It's more about perfect play than anything else, but you've already been doing that with Rhythm Tower and the standard modes. There's nothing that changes about these game modes, other than the novelty of playing the game while Chai's on speed, or increasing Chai's power to the point that it's almost ridiculous. However, much like everything else, these issues aren't the biggest problems in the world, because they're honestly also inconsequential. These game modes exist primarily to help show players that they can continue to improve. It's meant as a means to bring the skill ceiling even further up and give both new players and returning players something to dig their teeth into. It's a fun addition to the game, with content that is ultimately satisfying. The dev room was a nice surprise for players to stumble upon after getting all the achievements, since the marketing didn't hint at it at all. Seeing the developers talk about their struggles and reading their gratitude towards us, the players, was heartwarming. And the first time in a long time that it felt like we were being thanked as players for simply playing the game. Through those developer notes and bonus extras, Hi-Fi Rush's arcade update once again reminded me and other players the point of this game. It's meant to be entertainment, and it's meant to be fun.
We somehow made it through all of this.
Hi-Fi Rush is greater than the sum of its parts. It doesn't have the best combat in a game, nor does it have the best level design or story. It might have some of the best visuals and overall quality in its presentation, but that does come at the cost of some occasional performance problems and glitches. After 160 hours and over 10 full playthroughs under my belt, I believe that I can think of games that individually do every part of Hi-Fi Rush better than it does. But I struggle to think of games I've played recently that are this good in almost every area. Hi-Fi Rush isn't the most innovative title out there. Other than its central concept of fighting on rhythm, Hi-Fi might not be praised for most of what it's done, even if it got robbed at the Game Awards. Hi-Fi Rush was made out of pure passion for the art of games. It was made as a love letter to all of these various influences and references. The developers poured love and soul into this game that few others in recent memory have. The common thing everyone said during this game's release was that Hi-Fi Rush felt like a game from the PS2 era of games, and I completely agree. The unique concept of Hi-Fi Rush feels like something you'd see in the Wild West of PS2 era games. The wacky characters, colorful world, fun dialogue, and engaging mechanics allowed Hi-Fi Rush to truly earn the title of Game of the Year contender. And while it's unclear if it performed well, the director and Tango themselves are absolutely overflowing with praise for their finished product. Everyone deserves praise for this game. Johanas for bringing his idea to life, the composers for bringing us some of the best music of 2023, the voice actors who brought these characters to life, the art designers, programmers, writers, everyone deserves praise. Hi-Fi Rush is a new benchmark of the genre. Its flaws can be waved away with how the ultimate fact of the matter is that all the decisions were made with the intent of making an accessible, fun, special game that put entertainment above all other things. It didn't have any asterisks next to it, there were no abusive microtransactions, there was a high level of polish, and everything was working at release. Close to 5 years of development from a passionate studio gave us one of the most important and special games in recent memory. It's worthy of the praise it received at launch and 1 year later. Hi-Fi Rush is one of the best games of 2023. To me, it is the best game of 2023. Because more so than anything else I've said in this video, this game reminded me of something incredibly important. Hi-Fi Rush reminded me why I play video games. And I think that's worth celebrating.
Cause at the end of the day, it's all just a game. One we spend thousands and thousands of hours arguing, building, and polishing. But